Now we arrive at Gothic art, our last unit of study. Congratulations. Gothic art and architecture succeeded Romanesque and prevailed in Europe, most notably Northern Europe, from the mid-12th to the 16th century. Like Romanesque, the term Gothic was originally a derogatory label. Italian Renaissance artists coined the term to describe a type of medieval architecture that they had condemned as being barbaric. They implied quite wrongly that it was the architecture of the Gothic tribes who had destroyed the classical art of the Roman Empire. Nevertheless, the term Gothic refers to painting and sculpture of this time period as well, although there's a less precise connotation to these Gothic arts when compared to the uniqueness of Gothic architecture. Gothic architecture was opposed in style and principle to classical building ideals and forms. While initially compared unfavorably with Renaissance work, this value judgment no longer holds true, a familiar refrain. Be sure to carefully study your information pages on Gothic art and architecture, particularly the chart that compares Gothic with Romanesque. Keeping in mind that Gothic architecture can be summed up by the words height and light, let's look at the structural innovations that permitted this new style. What we're looking at here is a Gothic skeleton. Now, Gothic architects achieved height and light by fundamentally changing the structure of their architectural forms. This view of a typical Gothic cathedral shows the very basis of the Gothic style, that of building a strong skeleton or framework which supported the building and the vaults. Gothic architecture is about thought. Carefully chosen points carry the weight, while Romanesque architecture was about brute strength. Contrast the boxer with the puncher. Here are some types of vaulting that were employed throughout architecture. Number one, you see the barrel vault, which is also called the tunnel vault. Number two is the groin vault over a rectangular bay. Three is the Gothic vault with pointed arches and ribs over a rectangular bay. This is called a quadripartite vault. And four, similar to that but broken into 6 sections, is a sexpartite vault over 2 rectangular bays. Now, this one way the need for massive walls is reduced in Gothic skeletons is through the use of the rib vault that we see in numbers 3 and 4. The ribs themselves help carry some of the vault weight on their own. The sexpartite vault, seen in number 4, is the result of a transverse rib crossing the diagonal ribs, which alone would have constructed a quadripartite vault like we see in number 3. The second major contribution to the Gothic skeleton is the flying buttress. In a flying buttress construction, arches distribute weight to external piers, further contributing to the vertical aspect of this architecture. The flying buttress is so named for its exterior bridge-like appearance. So you see the arch here in number 12, and then number 10 and 11 show you that flying buttress. Early Gothic architecture got its start in the Abbey Church of Saint Denis and in Laon cathedrals. In the interest of time, we're going to focus on only one early Gothic church, that being Notre Dame of Paris. This is the west facade of Notre Dame from 1163 to around 1250. Most of the cathedrals of the Gothic period were dedicated to the Virgin Mary, Our Lady, or Notre Dame. Notre Dame of Paris is extremely similar to Laon Cathedral. One characteristic of the early Gothic manor seen in Notre Dame is the 4-story elevation. You see, as you look at the building, it's basically divided into 4 sections as it moves skyward. This is the nave and choir from Notre Dame in Paris, and it shows us a second characteristic of the early Gothic manor, and that's the use of the sexpartite vaulting system seen here above the nave. This is a view from the southeast of Notre Dame, and the spire seen here is basically an aspect of high Gothic architecture. Later on, these spires are much better integrated into the architectural form, as opposed to how it seems merely stuck on here at Notre Dame. Now, the penetration of the form by windows, made possible by the skeletal framework, can also be seen in this slide. With Romanesque vaulting systems, this exterior would never have been possible. Now, Saint Denis, again, is probably the starting point for Gothic sculpture, but almost none of this work survived the French Revolution. Therefore, we're going to go to Chartres Cathedral for a look at early Gothic sculpture. Chartres Cathedral itself is a high Gothic structure. A disastrous fire in 1194 destroyed all but the lower parts of the west tower and the portals between them. These portals are magnificent examples of the early Gothic style in sculpture. So this is the west portal from Chartres Cathedral, dating from around 1145 to 1170. Now, this image makes clear the new Gothic focus on clarity and symmetry. No longer are the figures entangled, as each figure is a separate entity. The entire design is strong and contributes greatly to the overall architectural design, as opposed to being mere decoration or even distraction. Here are the jam statues from the west portal at Chartres Cathedral. And perhaps of greater significance is the work seen in the jams. Some texts suggest that these works are inferior, and by that you can read Romanesque. But these figures, thought to represent the ancestors of Christ, signify a move in spirit away from the Romanesque period. The figures are calm and solemn, almost seeming to step away from their architectural setting. A gentle human quality is evidenced by the faces. Here, Gothic sculpture begins a return to a more naturalistic approach. Consider even the less schematized draperies for added evidence of the move away from the Romanesque. There exists a discipline of thought in Gothic art. Again, it's a triumph of the mind over brute strength. Gothic art and architecture can almost be seen as symbolizing the strength of faith triumphing over the concerns of the physical world, that is, the large concern of the church. Now here is Chartres Cathedral, the west facade, from 1145 to 1220. The north spire is from the 16th century, and the period that we're moving into now is High Gothic. The first High Gothic structure is generally thought to be the reconstructed Chartres Cathedral. This has an important history as a pilgrimage site because of its relic, the tunic of the Virgin Mary. Compared to Notre Dame, the portal of Chartres seems too small, almost as if it's wedged in between the two massive towers. Here are the portals at the north transept from Chartres Cathedral. Now, the design of this church contributed to the emphasis given to the huge portal complexes that are seen at the end of each transept arm. And compare the opulence of these portals with Notre Dame. The double-arched flying buttresses that you see quite well here at Chartres Cathedral almost hide the structure itself. Hence the argument, are they architecturally crude or structurally honest? Do the flying buttresses detract, or do they move our eyes ever upward? While our focus is on the vertical, these buildings in many ways are still vast horizontal forms. The flying buttress helped define Gothic's unique visual appeal. Here is the nave and choir from Chartres Cathedral. A quadripartite vaulting system used in Chartres is seen in the nave vaults. This system allowed for the abolishing of the alternate support system, and it opened up the interior. It's now a wide open space. Also note the elimination of the second-story gallery from early Gothic, and that'll soon be employed for a much lighter nave, as those enclosed second-story light gobblers were eliminated. Here's a plan for Chartres Cathedral, and the plan shows how the quadripartite vaults resulted from the dropping of the square schematism. Rectangular bays are easily vaulted in 4 sections now, as opposed to the 6 that were used in early Gothic. This is a plan for Bourges Cathedral, and this plan shows a vast contrast to Chartres. 2 major differences are the fact that sexpartite vaults are employed, and also there's no transept. This is the interior of Bourges Cathedral from around 1225 to 1250, and we're looking from the nave facing the east. And while Bourges may seem a step backwards in some ways in terms of the design, a magnificent sense of light can be seen in this cathedral, and this is a major distinction in comparison to the Romanesque churches that we've just finished studying. Here's the exterior of Bourges Cathedral in France from around 1195 to 1255. This is a view from the southeast. Now the relationship of the flying buttress to the structure and its piers is extremely clear in this slide. The double-arched flying buttresses transfer the weight of the vaulted roof to the pier buttresses, which each weigh 1,000 tons. This is Amiens Cathedral in France, the west facade from around 1220 to 1236. The area above the rose window in the center is from the early 16th century. Now, while similar to Laon Cathedral and Notre Dame in design, Amiens Cathedral is decidedly high Gothic in its intricate and richly decorated surfaces. Virtually all the surface areas are used for some sort of sculptural ornamentation. Note here also how deep the portals are, and the windows, in contrast to the more surface-like orientation of Notre Dame. Now, toward the end of the High Gothic period came a style known as rayonnant or radiant. This is by Jean de Chelles, the rose window of the north transept at Notre Dame in Paris, dating from 1240 to 1250. It's stained glass, iron, and lead stone bar tracery. The diameter of this window is 43 feet. Now, the term rayonnant derived from the radiating tracery of rose window designs, such as this rose window at Notre Dame. This design would extend to the use of lighter decorative moldings, tracery, and clustered columns in rayonnant architecture. This is Sainte-Chapelle in Paris from 1243 to 1248, a view toward the tribune, the rose window was installed after 1485. Rayonnette architecture is mostly about dissolving the wall surfaces. The skeletal approach of Gothic moves toward perfection here. Where are, for instance, the massive supporting piers? The spires here are elegantly ornamented, and this is typical of the Rayonnette style. The spires also emphasize the ever-upward movement of Gothic architecture. Now let's look inside. Inside Sainte-Chapelle, the full emphasis of light in the Rayonnette style is evident. There are virtually no walls. No longer are cathedrals dark and solemn. This is now a place to rejoice. Practically 75% of the wall space in Sainte-Chapelle is window. There's no room for piers here, and quadripartite vaults are used. This is Beauvais Cathedral in France, begun 1247 after plans that were drawn up in the 1230s. Now the rush upward is also seen as the focal point in Beauvais Cathedral, which was a terrific failure. In 1247, construction started and the vaults soon collapsed. In 1272, they made a second attempt at vaulting, and it collapsed again. In 1284, additional columns and buttresses were added, and they finished the nave. After 1500, an enormous crossing tower was added. And in 1573, the tower fell down, bringing the transept and the choir with it. So as I say, Beauvais Cathedral, a tremendous failure. We're going to look now at High Gothic sculpture, and one of the most richly embellished High Gothic cathedrals was found at Rheims Cathedral in France. This is the central portal of the west facade from around 1225 to 1290. Now the design and symmetry of early Gothic sculpture is seen in the Lord's Portal from Rheims Cathedral. Here the figures move away from being mere architectural devices. The shadows between the jamb figures show just how much space these figures occupy in moving away from the jambs. This is the Annunciation and Visitation from the west portal at Rheims Cathedral, 1225 to 1245. The jamb figures seen in this detail are over life size. Notable departures from the Romanesque period are seen in distinctions of age, gender, expressions, and individuality. The return to classicism here is almost complete. Look at the exquisite modeling of the features and the intricacies of the drapery folds. This is the Virgin of Paris from the early 14th century at Stone, Notre Dame in Paris. The foundations of the Renaissance were laid in Gothic sculpture. Further classical influence can be seen in the S-curve of Praxiteles showing up here, albeit artificially, in the late Gothic Virgin of Paris from Notre Dame. Late Gothic art and architecture was also called flamboyant. We're going to look now for a couple of moments at non-French Gothic. And a great demand for French architects and masons produced a rich variety of Gothic construction outside of France, as Romanesque traditions were wed to the new style, and this resulted in distinctive new architectural forms in Gothic cathedrals. England, Germany, and Italy became home to these new Gothic cathedrals. Here we're looking at Salisbury Cathedral in England from 1220 to 1270. The first fully Gothic construction in England was the choir of Canterbury Cathedral. Canterbury was very similar to Salisbury that we see here. Obviously, English Gothic placed far less emphasis on verticality. This is the nave and choir of Salisbury Cathedral. When you get inside these churches, however, you see that the scene is distinctively French in nature. This interior is very similar to Laon Cathedral in France, which we compared to Notre Dame. This is the choir at Gloucester Cathedral in England from 1332 to 1357. The English designers delighted in complex rib vault designs like this one in Gloucester Cathedral. Some English cathedrals even featured asymmetrical rib designs. The English took the French Gothic innovation of usefulness and molded it to fit their own sensibilities. This is the chapel of Henry VII, a view toward the west in Westminster Abbey in London, dating from 1503 to 1519. And these elaborate vaults are no better illustrated than by the vault of the chapel of Henry VII at Westminster Abbey in London. This is referred to as the Perpendicular or Tudor style, a late English Gothic style which celebrated pattern in architecture as opposed to simply being concerned with structural logic. This organic decoration is one of England's largest contributions to Gothic, in addition to its characteristic crossing tower that was seen previously in Salisbury Cathedral. As we close this chapter, I want you to look at Italian Gothic in your textbook, and note that Italy did not blindly follow the French lead. While they incorporated elements of French Gothic, they made England seem positively unpatriotic in their embrace of the French Gothic style. Gothic in Italy means Milan Cathedral and also the Doge's Palace that are seen in your text. They're very different, very much their own, but still Gothic structures.